Hello and welcome to RockCreek Insights. I'm Caroline Atkinson, Senior Global Strategist at RockCreek. And as part of our celebration of World Oceans Day, we're very pleased to feature one of the global leaders in ocean conservation, education, and research, the Monterey Bay Aquarium. And RockCreek, we're very happy that we partner with the aquarium as their outsourced Chief Investment Officer, or OCIO. We're passionate about helping them to advance their critical mission, which, and I quote, is to inspire the conservation of the ocean. It's my particular pleasure today to welcome Margaret Spring, who is the Monterey Bay Aquarium's Chief Conservation and Science Officer. In that role, Margaret oversees the aquarium's many conservation and science initiatives, including both on policy work on ocean science and conservation research. So, Margaret, first of all, thank you so much for being with us.
Exactly.
So perhaps you can just tell us a little bit about the aquarium and its mission and how, and the main features of this wonderful mission about inspiring ocean conservation around the world.
Sure, I'd be happy to. The Monterey Bay Aquarium, as you noted, our mission is to inspire conservation of the ocean, and we were founded in 1984 on the shores of the beautiful Monterey Bay, and originally designed by scientists, in fact, to bring what's under the ocean up into to see it, for people to really appreciate what was there. And the ecology of this place was the centerpiece of the aquarium, which is not just about an individual organism, but that everything's connected. And so our aquarium, when it opened, featured a huge and living giant kelp forest, which is still sort of the cathedral, the center of our aquarium today. We've expanded out over time because the ocean is everywhere. It's one of the largest habitat on Earth. It really holds the key to our survival, not only for food, but for buffering us from climate change. And so we now have a whole wing not only devoted to the outer, we started at the open sea, which is where a lot of the amazing wildlife here comes from many other places. And if you watched BBC's Big Blue Live a few years ago, you really saw the majesty of what we can see right from our back deck, from sea otters to whales and dolphins to amazing seabird.
And by the way, you're making me want to jump on a plane and come and look at this gorgeous place. That you've identified 4 big challenges where you're doing a lot of work on what you mentioned, first of all, about ecosystems and ecology, also sustainable seafood, plastic pollution, and climate change. And I'd love to hear your views on how those big challenges are being faced now. But just taken as a whole, how would you describe the overall state of our oceans today?
Well, I'm sorry to report that they're really in trouble, although I will tell you that there are some great hope spots and a lot of good examples of how we can do things right, and many of them have occurred here in Monterey Bay or in the United States, and where we can tell those stories, we do. And so we have, of course, rising ocean temperatures from climate change, acidification. These are the existential challenges of our time, and that really affects the ocean. And it's absorbed a lot of the heat and the that we've given it through emissions and such. But we are reaching a point where the increase in temperature is really changing migrations. It's increasing oxygen level, decreasing oxygen levels, and in general undermining our ability to resist future change. So we definitely want to bring that to people's attention. And so that's a big area. But also we've reached the limit of our ability to harvest the ocean sustainably, which is why we follow the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And one of the major issues, in addition to climate change, is overfishing and illegal fishing. And so, and aquaculture, I put that into that bucket because aquaculture is now filling the gap. But we are overfishing many of our fish stocks. However, I will say, from my time in the administration, when I worked in the Senate, we did reform U.S. Fishery law, and we now are the most sustainably managed harvested fishery country on earth. And so I feel like this is an area where we can show progress and give people hope and tell that story. And we've done that. So certainly our Seafood Watch program is sort of the trusted source for how are we doing on sustainable seafood, and whether it's fisheries or aquaculture. And in fact, at the first UN Ocean conference 5 years ago, and I'm going to the next one soon, our team was sitting right next to UN officials reporting on the state of global fisheries and aquaculture. Because the fact is that the United States, mostly, almost all the seafood we eat here is imported. Whatever we're eating here is affecting the rest of the world. And so we not only give, our U.S. fisheries are very well managed, but if we're going to be taking seafood from other countries, we want to know how that's farmed or harvested, and to assure not only that it's environmentally sustainable, but socially responsible.
We touched on climate, or you touched on climate, but before going back there, because that does seem like, you know, the big issue, let's talk a little bit about plastic pollution. I think we were all a bit shocked when the data was coming out about how much, well, the average American creates 270 pounds of plastic waste every year.
So there's a lot of confusion in the public about what we should buy, and it is frustrating. I do think that what our report did was that we've been spending a lot of time on cleaning up the end product. We can't keep up with it. We just can't. There's no way. The production is rising so fast that there's no way we can actually clean it up. And in fact, the economic incentives are all wrong. And the responsibility for paying for this is at the end of the pipe, and producers are producing so much without having a responsibility to deal with it, which is very unlike any other kind of pollutant in the ocean. And so fundamentally what's happened, it has been as this miracle invention has snuck up on it, and we actually have lost we don't have any mechanisms in place to capture it before it's released to the environment. Plastics are useful. However, we cannot have it enter the environment. How is that going to happen? Well, there's a lot of discussion about a circular economy, but really, all those mechanisms have to be in place. But we're seeing states in the United States, we're seeing states acting very independently to try to ban certain single-use plastics, because of over 40% of the plastics produced are single-use. Again, like seafood, plastic is globally traded. You cannot solve it in one place. You really have to look at the production to the end of the pipe. And at every stage, what our report said is you have to engage at every stage. You can't choose one strategy or another. You have to have producers thinking about where the plastic is going. And so there's a lot of innovation opportunity here, of course, but we have to put our money where the problem is, and we don't treat plastic as a pollutant.
And I love it that there is an opportunity for innovation and technological innovation, as well as just pricing and so on. Maybe we can turn back to the biggest, what I see as the biggest issue. You can tell me maybe it isn't, of climate change. And you were talking about how much the ocean has been affected by climate change and has in a way been a sink or an absorbent of a lot of the warmth that we've put out. But people don't necessarily think of the ocean. They're very aware if it spills over in the form of a tsunami or a flood, but otherwise they're not necessarily thinking of that as a part of climate change, and perhaps not thinking of how warming currents make a difference. And so perhaps you can talk about what you see as the biggest challenges, but then also in your research, what gives you the biggest hope about some solutions?
Well, I think that in terms of the research side of things, what we're finding is that there's a lot of opportunity to be had in building the resilience of the ocean to help us get through this moment, because we do have to, our job is to reduce our carbon emissions worldwide. But there's going to be a long, even if we do that, there's a long lag time. And I think most of the, unfortunately, the science is telling us that the temperatures are rising, but I do think that there's a lot more focus on protecting the ocean in terms of retaining as much resilience as possible, whether it's through marine protected areas or restoring estuaries and things like that. We have been documenting here the real changes in migration of animals associated with sea level.
Sea animals.
Yes, and we are seeing tunas, bluefin tuna going farther north. We're seeing white sharks popping up closer to us before they did, and that's actually changing the interactions with animals that they actually might fight, like our treasured sea otters, who are unfortunately blubberless. So if they're bitten, they lose their thermal regulation ability, and they often expire if we can't get to them in time. So you have these interactions between animals that you didn't ever expect before, but it's enabling us to, with the tagging and technology we've been able to use to track what's happening, whether it's steelhead trout and salmon. We're seeing how they're changing, but we also can see places where we can protect them. And so one of the things you're seeing is where you have an abundant kelp forest, for example, sea otters are protected from these changing migration patterns in a different way. And so these are examples of how resilient, and also these sea otters, when they actually are allowed to expand back into their original range, they were hunted almost to extinction, they actually help bring back the health of these estuaries. We've seen that here. And we've been really we're actually seeing that we're helping to replenish that population. And so we call them furry climate warriors, but these are the things that the ocean will bring us. And of course, everyone here is looking at offshore renewables as a potential way of solving things. And that could be, right now the focus is on wind, but there are many other ways that the ocean can help us. It's a huge source of current power and wave power. And so I'm hoping that not just wind, but other options will be looked at that we can harness this great power to help reverse things. And right now there's a lot of discussion about offshore wind in particular here as a critical component for helping us meet our climate goals.
It's kind of fascinating that the ocean, which people don't necessarily pay so much attention to, has not only absorbed more than 90% of the extra heat caused by greenhouse gas emissions, but it may be that has damaged the ocean itself, but there are ways that one can regenerate and build resilience so that the ocean can help to address climate change, as well as us learning how to do better by the ocean. I wanted to ask, what do you think is sort of two questions. One is, what are you seeing that concerns you the most in your overall research? And what are you seeing that gives you the most hope about improving the ocean's health?
Those are big questions.
Yes.
Yes. I think the thing that's concerning me is that we don't yet have, we have not licked pollution. And I think we have a good handle on how to do better on global fisheries and aquaculture. I feel very confident that there's a pathway to success. I think that we've seen some success here in the United States on pollution, but we've sort of gone backward a little bit. And now with the new forms of pollution, and which includes carbon dioxide, by the way, but chemical pollution, and also plastics are not just plastic, but they are also chemical mixtures. And so what we're exporting to the rest of the world essentially is a source of future harm. And we're really operating as in a large epidemiological experiment about what this is going to be doing to us in our lives and the health of our children. And one of the studies I'm now involved in is involved in the human health aspects of plastic pollution. And I think that's an area where we really have to look deep. I think there's a pathway to managing it, which is once you know the harm, the risk, you can identify mechanisms to mitigate it. But we are sort of behind the 8 ball. We're 60 years late to this problem. And so the good news is we have some tools. I think we can deploy them if the will is there. And what excites me is that the will is there, at least at the global level. And the question is, how can everyone come together? If we don't come together on this problem, which is very linked and it's very similar to climate, the same way, we really don't know what the future is going to hold for us as a society and as a global society.
I wanted to just turn quickly to, we hear from investors who say, I believe in climate change, I care about oceans, where can I invest to be part of the solution? So what are the greatest opportunities? Maybe a new technology, maybe there are emerging areas of technology that can have a positive impact on ocean health.
Oh gosh, there's so many things that could be just certainly, I do think science is underfunded, particularly on this issue. It's an expensive endeavor to contribute to science. The federal investment has been declining, and I'm seeing philanthropy and others moving into the space. But I do think public-private partnerships in the pursuit of solutions would be really valuable. And I don't see that's happening that much in the ocean, but I do think that that's an opportunity. Certainly, there are things like blue bonds and green bonds that are at a global scale, which are quite useful, especially in the most underfunded areas of the world. I think supporting, when you think about the opportunity for creating large protected areas, for example, they're out of sight. They're out of sight, and so how can satellite technology, remote sensing technology, all the technology that we can bring to almost everything in our daily lives, how can we utilize that to help understand what's happening there, and also to move the boundaries if we need to as things move. And so there's a lot of innovation there. But I think that investing in projects, one of the things that we've been working on has been trying to turn around fisheries and aquaculture operations around the world. And we have been really successful in bringing the government of that area together with stakeholders and businesses here who are funding projects in those places to turn around the actual source of the seafood and such. And those are, some people call them fishery improvement projects and things like that. There certainly are a lot of things like that the World Bank is involved with us in helping to bring to fruition.
World Bank,
but I do think that's money that's not always available to many of these projects. So I do think that I'd be happy to talk to anyone who's interested in investing in projects that are really going to bring a return within the time period of maybe the next 5 years, because that success begets success. And I think that we teed up a few projects, whether it's in India and Vietnam and in Indonesia, that could be good models for the future. And that's what we do here. The things that give me hope are that we've actually shown that there are a lot of models and things that we've done here in California or around here or through our projects that really give us hope that it's just a matter of applying these lessons learned in new places. And so I do think that there's an opportunity. And I would invest in source reduction and invest in getting your plastic footprint under control and your carbon footprint. Those are, and ideally we'd like to see, for example, for emissions reductions and offsets, to really see investments in projects that are going to build resilience. And I think there's not enough of those yet. And so that's an area where I know blue bonds would be looking at. But I do think that there are projects on a small scale in your community. There's projects on a global scale or the US scale. There's a lot to invest in. I'm happy to talk to you about it.
That's great. My last question is, As an individual, you've already said one thing. When you go to a restaurant or you're buying food, a fish, a seafood of any kind, at a grocery store, at fish market, make sure that you request for it to be sustainable, and that feeds through. What other, I mean, I'd like to say one thing, if there is one thing, but you've obviously know many, many things, but if there is a takeaway sort of behavior to help the ocean and to help the ocean health, what would that be?
One thing, you're testing my ability here. I would say consider what the ocean gives to you, and imagine and make the connection between what is happening in what you're doing in your life and where the repercussions are throughout the system. That can be seafood, that could be e-waste, that could be, you know, there's lots of places where, and a lot of what we don't think about the ocean when we think about our day-to-day lives. And I would just challenge us to think, if you're thinking sustainability in your business, think about the ocean and make those connections. I do think that that's the missing piece, is that people are very motivated to do the right thing, but if you don't even know what you're concerned about,
What that is.
Yeah, I do think that we don't make that connection, and consider the ocean is what I would say, in everything you do.